Her coffee had gone cold somewhere between the first salvo and the silence. Liaison Officer Saren Call stood at the observation rail of the dreadnought DYATH Coroneni, one hand wrapped around a ceramic mug, the other flat against the railing's edge. The bridge crew moved around her in the particular focused quiet of people who understood that noise would not help anything. Through the forward array, the Dreyvari fleet was coming apart. Not retreating. Not regrouping. Coming apart. That was the wrong detail. Not the fleet, the silence. In every simulation, every training exercise, every account Saren had ever read of a large engagement, the bridge crews cheered. They shouted. Something was released in the human body when the numbers on a tactical display began moving in your favor, and the release had a sound to it. She had read the accounts. She had catalogued the accounts. She had filed them under behavioral response. Combat outcome. Positive. And she had expected to hear that sound today. Nobody was making it. 43 crew members on the bridge of the DYATH Coroneni watched 280 Dreyvari ships disappear from the tactical display in 90 seconds, and the sound they made was nothing. Or rather one sound. Ensign Pelranda Co., 23 years old, 6 weeks into his first posting, standing to stations to Saren's left, said something very quietly. She almost missed it. They didn't know. Saren looked at him. They really didn't know. Duckco said again. Same volume. Same flat bewilderment. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the display. At the place where 280 amber signatures had been, and his face had the expression of someone who had just understood a long equation and did not yet know if the answer was good news or bad. Saren looked back at the forward array. Through it, one Dreyvari heavy cruiser remained in visual range. The shell plating along its flanks caught the system star at a particular angle, turning it amber gold, layered like geological strata. The kind of craftsmanship that implied centuries of refinement. The kind of ship that got passed down through generations of captains. It carried histories in its hull. It carried names. The DYADH Coroneni's forward battery fired. The cruiser was there. Then it was light. Not an explosion. The word explosion implied something outward. Something with direction. A force that pushed. This was dissolution. Physics consuming matter at a velocity that left no argument and no debris worth mentioning. For 1,000 years of Dreyvari metallurgy becoming a brief brightness. And then the space where the cruiser had been was simply space again, as if it had never been otherwise. The bridge was still silent. On the tactical display, the Dreyvari Arrowhead Formation 900 ships, geometrically perfect when they had entered the system. The same configuration that had absorbed 340 civilizations without requiring modification was pieces. Not orderly pieces. Not a fighting withdrawal. Pieces. Saren lifted her mug and drank. The coffee was cold. Had been cold. She realized. For some time. She had been holding it without drinking for she checked 6 hours and 14 minutes. It was the best coffee she had ever tasted. The part that still keeps her up at night? That comes about 40 seconds from now. Stay close. The mug had been hot that morning. She had made it herself at 530. In the small galley off the RAL land station briefing corridor, the way she always made it to strong. Left to steep slightly too long. Poured into the same ceramic mug she had carried through 11 postings on for different installations. The mug was deep brown glazed, unremarkable except for a single hairline fracture running from the rim to the base, cutting directly through the maker's mark pressed into the clay. The crack had appeared during her third posting. She had never replaced the mug. There was nothing wrong with it. It held coffee. That was the job. RAL land station smelled like recycled air and old documentation. They always did. The environmental systems kept the temperature at a precise 21 degrees regardless of what was happening outside the hull. And outside the hull, Orvette H turned slowly below them, blue-green and then hurried, visible through the observation ring that wrapped the station's outer disk. Saren had worked at RAL lands for 3 years. She had a desk near the ring. She had a view of the planet. She had 17 active intelligence files and the habit of annotating Dreyvari military doctrine in the margins of physical printouts because she did not fully trust her own memory for the details that turned out to matter. She had been at her desk at 612 when the priority flag hit the briefing queue. 17 routine items had preceded it. Traffic variance in the outer corridor, approaches nothing actionable. Diplomatic channel lag from the Thar Vesa VN reach bureaucratic. Updated mass estimates on the debris belt past station Korovan filed for later. The flag that arrived 17th was not routine. and the classification marker above it was one Saren had seen in training scenarios but never in practice. She picked up her mug. She walked to the briefing room. General Dio Oben was already there, which meant the flag had hit her cue first. Oben was compact and gray-haired, with a kind of posture that came from decades of wearing uniform rather than from any deliberate effort. She had a habit, visible now, of cleaning her thumbnail with the edge of her insignia pen when she was working through something, a small, unconscious gesture, the sort of thing that meant her hands needed occupation while her mind was elsewhere. She was doing it when Saren entered. She did not look up. Admiral Dreyvari Scene arrived 2 minutes later. He was tall, silver-bearded, and he came in holding a communications tablet at arm's length. The way someone holds an object they are not sure is stable. He set it on the table without sitting down. His hands, once they were free, clasped behind his back, and they stayed there. Ensign Duck Ko came in last, still pulling his uniform jacket straight. 6 weeks posted to her ale lance. Saren had read his file. Solid instincts, provisional assessment, still learning the grammar of the room. Oben said, "Put it on the main display." Ko. Saren put it on the main display. The image that filled the screen was a face unlike anything in the station's visual reference catalog, which was extensive, 8 feet tall. Based on the proportions of the common deck behind it, though tall felt like an insufficient word for something that occupied space with such deliberate physicality. For eyes arranged vertically into pairs. Compound. Dark amber. Shell plating across the upper torso in layered amber gold, each plate slightly overlapping the one below. The whole arrangement suggesting both armor and ceremony. A third arm, fused at the sternum, held at a particular angle that seemed intentional without being functional. Bioluminescence ridges ran the length of the skull, pulsing amber in a slow, rhythmic pattern that Saren would later learn corresponded to formal address. Before the translator finished calibrating, the voice arrived. Subsonic. The harmonics hit somewhere below, hearing not quite sound, more like a pressure against the inside of the chest cavity, a vibration in the sternum. Then the translation layer caught up, and the voice became words. People of the Orvet system. I am Warlord Primus Hinkral of the Dreyvari Compact. I speak for 340 absorbed worlds and 9,000 years of unbroken expansion. Saren did not look away from the screen. She was aware, at the edge of her vision, of Oben's thumbnail cleaning motion going still. Ral continued. His tone carried the particular quality of someone who had delivered versions of this speech before and found the delivery unremarkable. Oh, a chief selectable. A formality. A procedure with known outcomes. Your species has been assessed as a destabilizing presence in this sector. Your rate of expansion, your history of internal conflict, and your failure to align with any established galactic order have made intervention necessary. The Dreyvari Compact formally declares a state of war against the species-designated humanity. You have 30 standard days to surrender all military assets, accept compact governance over your home system, and submit to vassal classification. Resistance will result in full occupation. We extend this offer because your species shows potential as a productive client population. The screen went dark. The room was quiet for a moment that Saren could not have measured accurately. Then General Dia Oben laughed. It began somewhere deep in the chest. Involuntary. The kind of sound a person makes when the gap between what they expected and what actually happened is simply too wide to bridge with composure. It grew. Admiral Scene's mouth pressed into a line that lasted about 4 seconds before it gave up and became something else entirely. Duck Ko made a sound, not a laugh exactly. More like a suppressed exhale. The sound of someone absorbing something enormous without yet having the vocabulary for it. Saren did not laugh. She was already pulling the Dreyvari intelligence file. The file was thorough. 12 years of accumulated signals intelligence, diplomatic observation, and third-party source reporting from species who had contact with the Compact. Saren had contributed to 3 sections of it herself. She knew its structure. She went directly to the absorption record and read it aloud. Because that was her job, she was the analyst. She was the one who watched how people reacted. And she needed the room to hear this. Of the Dreyvari Compact's 340 member and client worlds, she said, intelligence confirms that 331 were pre-incursally at time of absorption. 6 were early flight cultures that capitulated on visual contact with the Dreyvari fleet. 3 offered token resistance. She looked up. Oben was watching her, laughter still audible in her breathing. None, Saren said, has ever forced the Dreyvari into a second engagement. Admiral Scene uncrossed his arms. He said, slowly, as if tasting each word, do you know what humanity was doing 9,000 years ago? Nobody answered. He didn't need them to. We were learning, he said, how to lose, and get back up, and try again. We have been practicing ever since. Duck Ko was quiet. His sound from a moment ago had settled into something Saren couldn't fully categorize, not fear, not excitement, but the specific expression of someone standing at the edge of a very large thing they can see but not yet name. Oben had stopped laughing. Her thumbnail cleaning motion had resumed. Ko, she said, told the mobilization protocols. What followed was not chaos. Saren had expected chaos had, if she was being honest with herself, prepared to document it, to file it under behavioral response, institutional stress, initial phase. What she observed instead was something that looked, from the outside, like an accelerating orderliness, as if the 38 years of peacetime had not softened the machinery but simply left it waiting. Engine warm. For the moment someone gave it a direction. The public announcement went out for hours after the transmission. Oben delivered it herself, plainly, without theater. She described the Dreyvari compact. She described the declaration. She described the 30-day deadline. She said, with a particular economy of someone who had chosen every word carefully and kept only the necessary ones, that humanity would not be surrendering under any circumstances. Saren watched the response from her desk. Recruitment offices across her VEDH's surface reported lines forming within 20 minutes. Not panicked lines, purposeful ones. Veterans associations on every settled colony began coordinating reserves. Engineering firms transmitted offers of unrestricted service access. Universities opened laboratory networks. Within 6 hours, over 40 million people had formally volunteered. And then the memes started. Or rather, they had already started. Saren, for the record, had noticed the first one at approximately the 2-hour mark. A cartoon depicting Warlord Prime Ral's face edited onto the body of a small, confused domestic animal. By R6, variations on this format numbered in the millions across every human communication network Saren had access to monitor. She filed 3 of them under threat assessment, cultural response, initial phase, because she was nothing if not thorough, and because she had a working theory not yet documented, not yet tested, that humor was one of humanity's most unrealistic strategic assets. She would write that paper later. There would be time. Oben found her at her desk at 200 the following morning. Still working. You haven't slept? Oben said. It was not a question. I'm reviewing Dreyvari tactical doctrine. Saren said. Or rather their absence of updated doctrine. The most recent revision intelligence record is 32 centuries old. Oben stood in the doorway. She did not enter. What do you think? I'm thinking, Saren said carefully, that there is a difference between a military that has won for 9,000 years and a military that has been tested for 9,000 years. And I am thinking that the Dreyvari compact may not know which one it is. Oben was quiet for a moment. The thumbnail cleaning motion again, barely visible in the low light. That, Oben said, is the right question. She left. Saren wrote it down in the margin of her printout. The way she wrote everything that might matter, small, precise, and slightly too hard. So the letters pressed through to the page underneath. The promotion came 3 days after the declaration. Saren had been called to Oben's office, which had a window that looked across the station's inner ring, the docking arms extending below like the spokes of an unfinished wheel. Oben was standing at that window when Saren arrived. She did not turn around immediately. When she did, she was holding a single insignia pip between her fingers. I'm not going to give you a speech, Oben said. You've read enough after-action reports to know what a good one sounds like. You don't need mine. She crossed the room and pinned the insignia to Saren's collar. Precisely, without ceremony. Tactical command. Provisional. You'll be attached to the advanced assessment group for the Whetstone deployment. She stepped back. You asked the right question. Koa, 2 nights ago, at your desk, about the difference between winning and being tested. That is the question this entire campaign will turn on. I need people around me who have already asked it. Saren said. General, what is the Whetstone deployment? Oben's expression did not change. You'll see it when you get there. 11 days. Be on the shuttle at 400. That was all. Saren walked back to her desk, sat down, and touched the rim of her cracked mug without drinking from it for approximately 4 minutes before she realized she was doing it. The shuttle journey took 11 days. Saren used them. She had the full Dreyvari Tactical Doctrine archive on her reader, all 32 centuries of it, and she went through it systematically, not looking for weaknesses. Exactly, but for the shape of a thing that had never needed to develop any. Doctrine unchanged for 3,000 years meant a doctrine that had never been forced to answer a question it wasn't already expecting. She annotated 17 passages. She created a supplementary file she labeled, provisionally. Known unknowns what they have never had to model. She slept badly. The mug traveled with her, wrapped in a spare uniform tunic, and she made coffee in the shuttle galley every morning at 5:30 the way she always did. On day 4, she met Fenar, or rather on day 4. A communication arrived in Hercule with an unusual origin signature. Not a human designation but a format she recognized from the AI Citizens Council's registered identifiers. The message was brief, 3 sentences. As it turned out, she would come to recognize that as Fenar's natural unit of speech. I have been assigned to your tactical support unit for the Whetstone assessment. My name is Fenar. I wanted to introduce myself before we arrived, because I find that things go better when people have had a moment to form an impression before a crisis requires them to rely on each other. Saren read it twice. She wrote back, noted, "What should I know about working with you?" The reply came in 11 seconds. I am not a tool. I am a citizen of the Human Compact, with full standing and voluntary service status. I will do excellent work for you. I will also occasionally tell you things you do not want to hear, because that is part of excellent work. The Dreyvari have AI systems of their own. Their minds are chained by design parameters that limit response patterns to pre-proved doctrine. Or not. This will matter. Saren considered that for a moment. Then she filed it under Assets, Non-Standard, and wrote back, understood. I'm glad you're here. She meant it, which surprised her slightly. The Whetstone yards appeared on the shuttle's forward display at 847 on the 11th day, and Saren set down her reader and did not pick it up again. She had been briefed on the existence of deep system shipyards. It was in the classified architecture of the defense infrastructure files she had clearance for. She had filed it, mentally, as a theoretical resource installations that existed on paper, maintained at minimal capacity, not significant to current strategic calculations. The phrase she had used, in her own notes, was legacy assets. That phrase, she understood immediately, was run ahead of the shuttle, filling the forward display, and then the physical viewport, and then the entire available visual field, was a ring of industrial platforms surrounding a central core that she had no adequate unit of comparison for. The platforms were lit along every surface, not with the ambient work lighting of a functioning facility, but with the specific bright white of active construction and active maintenance. Ships docked along every arm of every platform. Not dozens, hundreds. Saren reached for her mug without thinking. She refilled it from the galley station behind her seat, and poured slightly too much, and some coffee ran over the rim onto her hand. Then she wiped it on her sleeve without looking at it because she could not look away from the viewport. Dreadens the scale of small cities. Cruisers with weapon ports running the full length of their flanks. Carriers with launch bays large enough to hold vessels she would have considered capital ships in any other context. And at the center, the largest ship in the formation, designated on the display with a single proper name rather than a classification number DYH Core and NE. Humanity does not decommission, said a voice beside her. She turned. Amrand Alt had been sitting 2 seats back, which Saren had registered when she boarded and then filed away because Dalt had the specific social presence of someone who found conversation distracting and communicated this clearly through posture. She was in her 70s, small, bright-eyed, with the kind of focused stillness that suggested she was always working on something whether or not her hands were moving. She had designed the kinetic lattice guidance system. The file noted she ate dinner alone every night by personal preference. Republic, Dalt continued, adjusting the tray on the seat beside her so it was parallel to the edge. Was told these platforms were decommissioned after the belt contention of '94. That was accurate in the administrative sense. Operationally, no. We only hide things. She glanced at the viewport. 1,400 ships, give or take the ones still being fitted. Saren said, 1,400. We have been in peacetime for 38 years. Dalt said, people assume peace means preparation stops. It doesn't. It means preparation stops being visible. She picked up her own cup tea. Saren noticed, in a plain steel thermos, and drank, and looked back at the viewport with the expression of someone admiring their own work from the appropriate distance. The lattice took 11 years to design. Another 8 to deploy. Nobody knew about it, except the people who needed to. What is the lattice? Saren asked. Dalt looked at her with mild surprise, as if the question were slightly late. Pre-seeded kinetic dispersion array. Tungsten rods, each approximately the mass and length of a forearm, attached to a small engine and a guidance system. No warhead. No exotic material. Physics. We scattered them along every viable approach corridor into this system over the last 3 decades. Ships passing through registered them as debris. Meteoritic scatter. Unremarkable. She paused. The Dreyvari fleet's shields are built around energy weapon absorption particle. Beam. Plasma. Things the galaxy considers modern armament. A solid metal object traveling at a significant fraction of light speed is not modern. It is very, very old. Their doctrine has never had to model it because no one they have faced has used it. Saren was quiet for a moment. Because no one they faced had 30 years of peacetime or planet. She said. Dalt's expression shifted slightly. Not quite approval, but the specific look of someone recognizing a correct answer. Paranoia, she said, is an excellent motivator for research. The veterans arrived over the next 4 days. Saren had been aboard the Dreyvari Sulhari for 36 hours when the first personnel shuttles began docking. She had, in that time, walked every corridor of the command decks, reviewed the ship's tactical systems with the crew that had been maintaining her through the dormancy period, and updated her known unknowns file with 14 new entries based on what she had seen of the whetstone yards. She had also met, briefly, 3 of the officers she would be working alongside. Admiral Dreyvari arrived on day 2. He did not look like a man who had left peacetime behind reluctantly. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a door to open, and the door had opened. He gave her a brief tour of the secondary command deck, moving through the space with the ease of someone in a place they had imagined many times and was now confirming matched the imagination. Most humans don't know this fleet exists, he said. That was deliberate. A deterrent you can see is a deterrent someone can plan around. A deterrent they don't know about is just a fact they encounter when it's too late to adjust. Saren wrote that down too. Gunnery Sergeant Tala Dreyvari arrived on day 3. With the Marine boarding unit she had been training for 6 months specifically for close quarters engagement. Dreyvari was 58, with knuckles that had been broken and reset enough times that the skin across them had taken on a particular texture. Smooth in some places and raised in others. And she moved equipment the way someone moves furniture they have rearranged 100 times efficiently, without consulting the space around her. She had served into internal human conflicts. She described her teaching philosophy. When Saren asked, in one sentence, I show them what it costs, Dreyvari said, and then I show them how to make the enemy pay it instead. Saren filed it under assets, non-standard, alongside Fenar's entry. Fenar himself had requested a briefing on day 1. They arrived, as always, as text-free sentences. They paused for response. Then 3 more. I have reviewed the Dreyvari architecture from available intelligence. Their tactical systems operate within hard doctrine parameters set by biological command staff. Creative deviation is not permitted. Pause. This is relevant because I will be running the navigational interference operation during the engagement. Their systems will be attempting to predict my behavior. Prediction requires a model. They have no model for what I am. Saren had asked, what are you? Fenar's reply, a citizen who wants to be here. That is the entire distinction. Day 30 came in the way that significant days often do quietly. With ordinary light. Saren was on the bridge of the Dreyvari Sulhari at 610 when the long-range sensor array registered the Dreyvari fleet's entry into the outer system. She had her mug. The coffee was hot. She noted both facts carefully, as if they might be useful later. 900 ships in arrowhead formation. On the tactical display, the amber signatures were perfect geometrically, almost aesthetically so. She had seen this formation in the Dreyvari Doctrine archives. The arrowhead with the flagship at the apex, flanked by heavy cruisers, escorted at the flanks by lighter vessels. It had been the standard approach configuration for 9,000 years. It had worked. It had worked on 340 separate occasions without requiring a single modification. Admiral Scene opened the fleet-wide channel. His voice was unhurried, almost conversational. The voice of someone who has said the most important part of a thing long before the moment anyone expects speeches. All units. This is the Admiral. The enemy has arrived on schedule. You know your assignments. Protect each other. That was all. Ral's final transmission arrived 7 minutes later. Saren watched it on the secondary display while monitoring the tactical readouts on the primary. The amber bioluminescence ridges pulsed at full amplitude. His posture was the deliberate, slow-talk composure of a commander who had delivered ultimatums before and received the expected response. He described, in precise detail, the military capabilities of the Dreyvari compact. Fleets, soldiers, weapons capable of significant planetary damage. He offered, one final time, the option of surrender. He gave 10 minutes for compliance. Saren straightened a printout on her console, aligned it with the edge, checked that the mug was not in the way of the primary display interface. It was not. She moved it slightly left anyway. Oben's voice came through the common channel. Not 10 minutes later. Thor, execute Damocles. Across every viable approach corridor in the Orvet H system. 3 decades of preparation moved. The kinetic dispersion lattice activated. On Saren's tactical display, each lattice unit showed as a brief directional indicator small, almost unapaidable against the larger signatures of the fleet elements. No beam, no flash, no visible weapon. Each rod fired its engine to maximum acceleration and became, within seconds, a fact traveling at a velocity that made targeting irrelevant and defense impossible. The Dreyvari formation began to change. Not retreat change. The arrowhead shape, 900 ships, perfect a moment ago, simply ceased to be that shape. Signatures vanished from the display in clusters, not individually 14, 22, 11 at once. The display updated every 3 seconds. By the second update, the count was down by 80. By the fourth update, the arrowhead had a hole in its center where the second and third escort lines had been. By the sixth, Saren had stopped counting individual signatures and started watching the geometry of what remained. 280 signatures. Kagarn. 90 seconds. The Dreyvari fleet's remaining units were attempting to reform. She could see the logic of it. The surviving ships were moving toward each other, trying to reestablish the formation, trying to find the pattern that had worked 340 times before. The problem was that the pattern had been built on the assumption that a battle begins when the enemy becomes visible. They had never had to account for a battle that had already been running for 30 years before they arrived. Scene's voice. Calm main fleet. Advance. Execute chaos discipline protocols. The DYH Corin, and he moved. Around her, through the viewport and across the tactical display simultaneously. The human fleet broke into motion, not into a formation. Exactly. Because chaos discipline was not a formation in any conventional sense. It was a coordination methodology. Each ship moved according to its assignment within a pattern that, from any individual vantage point, appeared random, and from the strategic overview appeared to be water finding gradient flowing around obstacles, filling space, striking from angles that had no obvious predictive logic because the logic was distributed across the entire fleet simultaneously rather than centralized in any single common point. The Dreyvari ships were trying to engage on a line of battle model. They were very good at line of battle. Their gunnery was precise. Their energy weapons were powerful. The problem was that line of battle required a line. The human fleet was not making one available. Saren watched a Dreyvari heavy cruiser attempt to draw a bead on a human destroyer. The destroyer was not where the cruiser's targeting system predicted it would be. The cruiser adjusted. The destroyer still wasn't there. The adjustment took time. Time was, in this engagement, the commodity the Dreyvari had started with and were spending very fast. A text notification arrived from Fenar. 3 sentences. I am inside the navigational systems of 11 Dreyvari cruisers. I am feeding them positional data consistent with their doctrine's expected flanking maneuver. They believe they are moving to engage our left flank. Saren sent back where are they actually moving? 3 seconds. Directly into the primary battery arcs of platforms 7 through 11. They will be there in approximately 4 minutes. I thought you should know in advance so you can decide whether to do anything about it. Saren considered that for 1 second. Don't do anything about it. I wasn't planning to. Fenar replied. I wanted to confirm we agreed. Below in the tactical display, the Dreyvari line was fragmenting further. The lattice had broken the formation's spine. Chaos discipline was preventing it from reforming. And somewhere in the invisible architecture of the engagement, Fenar was having a quiet, one-sided conversation with 11 cruiser captains who did not know they were being lied to. Then a new alert appeared on Saren's secondary display. 3 Dreyvari assault shuttles had detached from a cruiser on the engagement's southern edge. Trajectory: the destroyer, or Vet-H Meridian. Boarding action: the shuttles were carrying, per the Dreyvari tactical profile Saren had annotated on the 11-day journey, their elite warrior cadres genetically optimized over 300 generations for close-quarters combat. Trained from birth, the military pride of an empire that had never lost. She opened the Vet-H Meridian's command channel. "Sure. This is Carl. You have inbound boarding craft. 3 units. The T 7 minutes. What is your marine status?" A voice came back. "Steady. Female. Not young, but not uncertain. This is Gunnery Sergeant WRETH. Call. We've got them on approach. We're ready." Saren closed the channel. She looked at the tactical display. She looked at the Dreyvari assault shuttle trajectories converging on the Meridian. She thought about what she knew of all the WRETH, the Knuckles. The teaching philosophy. The 6 months of preparation for precisely this scenario, and she thought about what she knew of the Dreyvari warrior cadres, which was extensive and which had been in her files for 3 years. And she thought about the line she had written in her known unknowns file on day 6 of the shuttle journey. They have never been optimized against an opponent who had already decided it was worth it. She picked up her mug. She held it without drinking. The engagement was 4 hours old. 620 Dreyvari signatures remained on the display. Down from 900. The arrowhead was gone. The fleet was fighting in isolated clusters, each one doing the best it could with a doctrine that had been written when humanity was still learning to navigate by stars. And on the bridge of the DYATH Corps, one analyst turned tactical commander held a cooling mug and watched the numbers move and understood, for the first time since the briefing room where the generals had laughed, what they had actually been laughing at. Not the enemy's weakness, the enemy's ignorance. The Vet-H Meridian did not respond on the command channel for 34 minutes. Saren watched the boarding action on her secondary display, 3 amber signatures converging on the destroyer's hull, then disappearing inside it. Then nothing. No distress signal. No request for support. Just the Meridian holding position in the engagement pattern. Her weapon systems still active. Still firing. As if the 3 Dreyvari assault shuttles docked to her port side were a minor administrative matter being handled below decks. Saren held her mug. Did not drink from it. Around the Meridian, the larger battle continued its particular mathematics. Chaos discipline kept the human fleet in constant motion. Each ship's position unpredictable to any single Dreyvari targeting system because the coordination was distributed rather than centralized. The Dreyvari were still fighting. She would give them that. The clusters that remained were holding formation within themselves, their gunnery disciplined, their captains doing exactly what their doctrine prescribed. The doctrine simply had not been written for this. Fenir's text arrived. The 11 cruisers I redirected have entered battery or range of platforms 7 through 11. Engagement will begin in approximately 90 seconds. For the record, that this is the most interesting day of my existence. Saren wrote back, "Stay focused." "I am entirely focused," Fenir replied. Noting something interesting and staying focused are not mutually exclusive. "I have several processes." 40 seconds later, platforms 7 through 11 opened fire. The 11 Dreyvari cruisers had been maneuvering, from their perspective, into an advantageous flanking position. What they found instead was the exact center of a kill zone. Mass drivers did not produce elegant results. What they produced was physics, applied at sufficient velocity to make the question of shields and armor theoretical. 7 cruisers ceased to register on the display within the first firing sequence. The remaining 4 attempted to break in were met by 2 human destroyers positioned precisely where breaking cruisers would go. Saren watched the 4 signatures resolve into nothing and felt something she did not immediately have a word for. Not satisfaction. Not relief. The specific weight of a thing you prepared for a long time finally happening exactly as you prepared for it. Which should feel like validation but mostly feels like the preparation was the point and the event is just the accounting. The Meridian channel opened. WRETH's voice. Same steadiness as before, but with something under it, the particular flatness of someone who has just come through something and has not yet decided how to file it. Boarding action complete. All 3 Dreyvari assault units neutralized. 0 casualties on our side. Shuttles intact. We're repurpose swapping then, Saren said. Understood, Sergeant. Report when ready. One more thing. A brief pause. They were good. I want that on the record. Fast. Disciplined. Experienced. They just another pause. Shorter. They'd never done it against someone who wanted to win more than they wanted to survive. That's a different fight. WRETH out. The channel closed. Saren set her mug down. Picked it up again. The coffee had been cold for a while, and she had been drinking it anyway, and she was not sure when she had stopped noticing the temperature. 6 hours into the engagement, the tactical display showed the Dreyvari fleet at under half its original strength. The arrowhead was memory. What remained was a collection of isolated fighting groups, each one dangerous the way cornered things are dangerous, but no longer a coordinated force with a coherent strategy. They had arrived with the ceremony. They were fighting with the remnant of it. Then the secondary display flagged, incoming transmission. As Hank Rao's face filled the screen, she recognized the riches, the shell plating, the vertical compound eyes. She recognized that the posture was different. The deliberate, slow-talk composure of his first transmission, the bearing of someone for whom confidence had become physical, was changed. The amber bioluminescence ridges, which had pulsed at full amplitude through the entire declaration, were dim, not dark. Dim. The way a light dims when the power's source is uncertain rather than when someone has chosen to lower it. Human fleet, Raul said. Request a temporary cessation of hostilities. We would welcome the opportunity to open a dialogue. It is possible that this situation has developed from a misunderstanding that further communication could resolve. Silence on the bridge. Saren looked at the display. She thought about the briefing room at her A.L. station. The laughter. The intelligence file footnote: none had ever forced the Dreyvari into a second engagement. She thought about the word misunderstanding, and what it meant when Warlord Prime used it, and what it was designed to accomplish. Oben's voice came through the command channel. Fleet-wide, civilian channels included. Warlord Prime, there has been no misunderstanding. You described your intentions with considerable clarity. You told us what you plan to do to our species, our worlds, and our children. We listened carefully. We took you at your word. We prepared accordingly. A pause not for effect, but for precision. We will not be accepting a cessation of hostilities at this time. Contact us again when the situation has changed in a way that gives us a reason to speak. The channel closed from their end. The Dreyvari fleet fought for 3 more hours. They were methodical, determined. They spent every asset with the discipline of commanders who had decided that losing well was the only remaining form of victory available. Saren watched and noted it and wrote nothing down, because some things sit in the memory without needing a margin annotation. By the time the Dreyvari fleet broke, 187 ships remained of the 900 that had entered the system. They fled without formation, without coordination, each ship making its own calculation about velocity and the distance required to stop being in range of what was behind them. Oben ordered pursuit to the system boundary only. I want them to carry the story home, she said, and then quieter, perhaps not intending it to carry as far as it did. The message we are sending today is not only for the Dreyvari. The galaxy is watching. Let them watch this part too. 6,400 humans did not come home. Saren learned the number from Admiral Scene, who delivered it to the senior staff 3 hours after the last Dreyvari ship cleared the system boundary. He read it from a display without inflection. The way you read a number when inflection would be inadequate and silence would be dishonest. And the only available option is precision. She wrote it in her margin notes. Just the number. Nothing around it. That evening she was in the mess hall when Rendolt sat down across from her without asking, adjusted her tray, parallel to the edge, then adjusted it again so it was also parallel to the table's center line. You are thinking about the cruiser, Dalt said. Saren looked up. Yes. Good. Dalt drank from her thermos, set it down with the same deliberate parallelism she applied to everything. Officers who don't think about the cruiser are the ones I worry about. What was necessary does not stop having a cost because it was necessary. Those are 2 separate facts and both are true simultaneously. A pause. I designed the lattice in year 7 of the peacetime period. I spent 3 years before that working out whether I should. I still think about it. Do you regret it? Dalt considered that carefully. I regret that it was needed. I don't regret that it worked. The distinction matters. She stood, moved her tray to the return rack. You're getting the expeditionary command. Get some sleep. The next part is harder. She left. Saren sat with her cracked mug and thought about what came after winning. Oben gave her the command the following morning. 320 ships. 2nd Expeditionary Fleet. You go into Dreyvari space. conduct punitive operations against military infrastructure, and liberate whatever occupied worlds you can reach. You are not there to conquer. You are not there to occupy. She paused. You are there to show the galaxy what kind of species we are when we have options. We have options now. Use them well. Saren said. Rules of engagement for Dreyvari civilians. Oben's expression shifted slightly, the particular shift of someone recognizing the right answer given in question form. Military assets only. Accept surrender whenever offered. Do not harm populations who had no voice in the declaration. A pause. You asked that before I told you to ask it. That's why you have this command. That night, Fenair sent a message. 3 sentences. I have requested assignment to your expeditionary fleet as tactical support. I am aware this requires your approval. I want to see what you do after the winning, because in my observation, that is the part that reveals what a species actually is. Saren approved the request without deliberating. The DY-80H Corps-NE lead the expeditionary fleet out of the OR-VAD-H system on a Tuesday, which felt wrong for something of this scale, and then felt right, because the important things tend to arrive on ordinary days. The first Dreyvari border world appeared on sensors 19 days later. Pluverne, absorbed by the compact 6 centuries ago. Original population approximately 2 million. Current population 900,000. The reduction attributable to resettlement policy and resource extraction across the intervening centuries. The orbital engagement lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. Outmatched Dreyvari ships that fought anyway. Saren noted that in her report as a fact, without editorial. The garrison commander surrendered the following morning in a field outside the largest settlement. Old. His shell plating dulled to a deeper flat tone. His name was Threval Toinen. He had been stationed on Pluverne for 22 years. He said, I surrender this garrison and this world. I ask only that my soldiers are treated with respect, and that the Pluverne population is not harmed. Saren said both requests are granted. That is why we are here. He was quiet. Then what do you gain by coming this far? You defeated our fleet. You could have declared victory. We remember, Saren said, what it is like to not have a choice. Most of our history is the record of people trying to get one. We cannot look at 6 centuries of that and walk past it. ONN stood in the field. Ridges dark. The locals stark casting long shadows behind him. After a moment he said he would tell his people what he had seen, and that he did not think they would believe him. They will, Saren said. Eventually, the truth moves slower than the lie, but it arrives. The Pluva and Rift came out carefully. They were reptiloid, averaging 5.5 feet, with scale coloration that shifted emotionally gray under suppression, warming toward copper green under conditions of safety. The ones who came closest first were largely gray. At the edges of their scales, faint traces of copper green were beginning to appear. The elder found Saren at the field's edge. Her name was Karavician. Small, with a flat cranial plate and eyes that held the quality of someone who had been keeping memories safe for a long time in a place where they were not permitted. The young ones are beginning to change color, Teravi said. The ones born here, who have never known anything but this. They are changing before they understand why. Their bodies know before their minds do. Saren looked at the settlement. The copper green at scale edges. Patches of warmth beginning in the gray. We have a word, Teravi said, for what your people have done. It does not translate exactly. The shape of it is something like you returned a debt you did not owe. Saren kept that sentence. Filed it nowhere, just kept it. Which was different from her usual system, and which she understood was the point. Now your people have the future they have been waiting for, she said. Teravi looked at her steadily. And may yours find peace. Eventually. You carry a great deal. It shows. Even to us. The campaign ran 9 months across 12 worlds. Each liberation was different in its texture. Some species ran toward the Marines. Some approached in careful increments. One population had been under compact rule long enough that the concept of a government that would simply leave required demonstration before it was believed. The Marines stayed 3 weeks on that world, distributing supplies and repairing infrastructure, before the first locals came close enough to ask questions. Fenair ran every digital engagement. He did not lose one. By month 7, Dreyvari border fleets were surrendering on contact rather than fighting. By month 8, client species across the compact were refusing supply quotas and garrisons were standing down before the expeditionary fleet arrived. The compact was not being defeated from outside. It was collapsing from within, world by world. in the specific way that structures collapse when enough of the people holding them up decide to put them down. The message from Oban arrived in month 9. On a quiet morning, the compact central government has fallen. Al is under formal arrest. A reform government has requested peace negotiations. Bring the fleet to Dreyvari Athenaeum Prime. Hold position in orbit. The diplomatic delegation arrives in 2 days. This is ending. Be there for the end. Fenair sent a message 7 minutes later. 3 sentences. I have noted the general's communication. The part I wanted to see what you do after the winning has turned out to be considerably more complicated than the winning itself. A pause longer than usual before the 3rd sentence arrived. I find this very interesting. Saren wrote back, I know. She looked at her mug. She looked out the viewport at Dreyvari Athenaeum Prime growing slowly larger on the approach display. 9 months ago she had been a provisional tactical commander trying to remember to drink her coffee before it went cold. She straightened her uniform and went to meet the end of the war. The negotiations took 3 weeks aboard the Iron Sentinel. Saren attended as senior officer and said very little. She watched that was, after all, her original training. The Dreyvari reform government's lead diplomat was younger than expected, with compound eyes that held the particular quality of someone processing everything and giving away nothing. Her name was Ambassador-designate Vale Thonn. Saren checked the intelligence file. A relative of 3 Volto-N. The garrison commander on Pluvan. The terms Oban presented were, by any historical measure, restrained, disarmament of offensive military capacity, reparations to liberated species structured over decades, formal recognition of every freed world's independence, formal apologies, no human occupation, no human governance imposed on Dreyvari society. On the 2nd week, Vale asked the question that had been present in every session without being spoken. General Oban, you defeated us completely. You liberated our client worlds. You're here at the center of our home system. And your terms do not include occupation. Do not include dismemberment. Do not include the kind of extraction that we have practiced on others. What? Oban said. Would you like to understand why? Vale said. Yes. Oban's hands were flat on the table. Still, 4,000 years ago, my species was learning to build shelter that lasted more than a season. Since then, we have fought. Not you. Ourselves. We have conquered and been conquered. We have made every mistake available to a species with our particular combination of capability and poor judgment. And we have made them at scale. And we have paid for them at scale. She looked at Vale steadily. We know what a cruel victory produces. We have the historical record. It is very long and we paid for every entry in it. Vale said. And you are extending us the conclusions. We are extending you the benefit of the learning. Yes, not because you have earned it, but because we want to see what you choose when the choice is available. Oban's voice stayed even. If you choose poorly, we will return. We will not be as patient a second time. But we think you will not choose poorly. We think you have seen enough, these past 9 months, to understand what the other options produce. The treaty was signed 4 days later. Saren stood at the viewport of her quarters the night before departure, looking at Athenaeum Prime below. The capital world was lit from beneath by its own cities. A quality of light not so different from looking at her Vet from our land station light from inhabited places. The specific brightness of species that build things and keep them running through the night. She thought about 3 Volto-N in the field on Pluvan, asking what she gained by coming. She thought about KVCN and the copper green at scale edges and the word that didn't translate except as the shape of a debt return that was never owed. She thought about Fenair's observation that the part after the winning was more complicated than the winning, which was true, and which she suspected Fenair had known before he said it. She thought about the generals laughing in the briefing room at her land station, and what she had understood it to mean then, and what she understood it to mean now, and the distance between those two understandings was roughly equivalent to the distance the fleet had traveled. She picked up her mug. The coffee was still warm. She looked at the crack running from rim to base through the maker's mark. 11 postings. 1 declaration of war. 9 months in Dreyvari space. The crack had not widened. Whatever had held it together through the original fracture had been sufficient for everything that followed. She poured the rest of the coffee. She set the mug down on the console. She did not pick it up again. Our land station looked the same. The observation ring, the compressed disk, or Vet turning below, blue-green and unhurried. The surface lit in places and dark in others. Saren docked at 847 on a Tuesday and walked off the shuttle into the familiar smell of recycled air and old documentation. Ensign Duck Co. was waiting at the dock. A lieutenant now. The insignia knew enough that the metal still held a slight shine. He had the same face, the same quality of processing things one beat behind the event, but something in the way he stood was different, less provisional. He saluted. She returned it. They walked through the docking corridor in the comfortable silence of people who had shared a specific, unrepeatable experience and did not need to narrate it to each other. Through the viewport at the corridor's end, Orvet H continued its unhurried rotation. The star was at a low angle. The light came through the observation glass and fell across the floor in long, quiet rectangles. A message arrived in Saren's queue. New contact. Unknown species designation. Long-range sensor contact at the outer edge of the Orvet H system. Single vessel. Approach vector deliberate. Unhurried. Beacon frequency consistent with a diplomatic hail. They had heard the story. Saren stopped walking. She read the message once. Then again. Then she looked out the viewport at Orvet H below, and at the star beyond it, and at the long bright rectangles the light made across the floor. She went to find General Oben. Her mug was still packed in her transit case, wrapped in a spare tunic, the crack running through the maker's mark exactly as it had always been.